All right, let's get started with session 2 of 4 on day 2 of Breakpoint. Welcome back. It gives me great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Abesh Rajasekharan, who is a senior technology manager at Thomson Reuters. Abesh is a DevOps evangelist and also an AWS and DevOps architect. He's also a Docker Swarm, and a K8s expert. At Breakpoint, for this talk, Abesh will be talking to us about the classical question of build versus buy, and we'll be covering important considerations to keep in mind when you're evaluating a build versus buy decision, or when you're making a build versus buy decision, and the pros and cons of each option. Great. I'm going to now hand it over to you, Abesh.
First of all, Praveen, thanks for the introduction. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, where we're joining from. I hope all of you are staying healthy and staying safe. Today, we are going to be talking about a topic which is frequently discussed, especially in medium and large enterprises, build versus buy. And build versus buy is a very significant decision that many companies face when addressing software needs. When it comes to software solutions, it can be quite difficult to decide whether to choose the flexibility of building a tried and trusted solution, or to buy off-the-market software and use the agility. Many businesses today face this dilemma, and it's not just about cost. Unfortunately, the major player in the decision is cost, but we'll talk about the various factors in this talk over the next half an hour, 35 minutes, that needs to be considered in terms of buying or building, and what are the factors that will help us decide what to do. So I will also be talking about a few factors that Thomson Reuters considered when we looked at BrowserStack for our QA needs, especially on a product named Checkpoint. So we'll cover some of that as well. So let me start with a small introduction, just like Praveen was talking about. My name is Abesh Rajasekharan. I'm a senior engineering manager at Thomson Reuters, close to 15 plus years of experience. My area of expertise are DevOps, automation, continuous delivery, deployment, cloud engineering, especially Amazon Web Services and Amazon certified as well. So before we talk about the factors that we need to decide on the build and buy decision, and how all those factors impacts our decision, let's take a very common scenario that happens in a lot of organizations today. Imagine you're building a product, and you need a feature flag platform for that product. So there are two types of resources that we have, two types of people, right? We have buyers, we have builders. So if you look at the buyers are the ones who decide to spring for that existing tool out there, and they realize that spending that $2,500 per month for the feature flag platform stings a little bit, but it will ultimately help them to make that money, right? It will ultimately help their customers, and it's going to help them eventually. Builders are the folks who balk at that $2,500 per month, and that it's not worth, they feel that it's not worth that money. And what they try to do, they basically try to build a homegrown solution using their engineering resources, probably start with a weekend hackathon, and they just go ahead from there. What's the problem? Now, the problem is that weekend hackathon that basically proved the proof of concept basically turns into a couple of weeks of work to just get it right. It turns into a month of work where you have to consider all the edge case scenarios. And before you know it, you all of a sudden have spent more money, time, resources in building a feature flag platform, which at best can be used to buy your product. And we'll talk more about some of those scenarios in the later slides. If you look at both buyers and builders, who is right here? To be honest, both of them are not right? There is more to consider than the cost when you're buying a platform, when you're buying a software solution. There is also more to consider than cost when you're building as well. So let's go through some of them. So we'll first go through the factors that needs to be considered in favor of buying. So there are 6 factors that I've listed here: problem, budget, timelines, cost, opportunity cost, quality compromises, and technical depth and long-term vision. So let's dive in and go through each of them and see how each of these factors play into a build versus buy decision. First one, the problem. right? So obviously you have a problem. That's why you're looking at a solution. Now, there are various kinds of problems that you might have. You have a common problem that is very common in the industry. It is probably already solved by a solution that exists in the industry. And in those scenarios, you are better off buying those solutions, right? You'll have to ask yourself, do you really have to reinvent the wheel, or just go for a tried and tested solution? There are another set of solutions which could be very unique to your product or your organization. And we'll also talk about edge cases in a little bit, but let's talk about the unique problems, right? There might be cases where you have a very unique problem and there is the market or the industry has not seen it, and that forces you to build it. I think that is the only problem statement, along with some edge cases, that should force you to build. Otherwise, if there is a solution that already exists, you need to look at buying it. And I'll talk about how Thomson Reuters and Checkpoint looked at that in a minute. But the other factor that you need to also consider here is when you have a unique problem, not always, but a lot of times when you have a unique problem, it is worth spending a little bit more time looking at why that problem is unique. Because if the industry has not seen that problem, if you believe that you have a problem which is unique and nobody else has seen it, there's a good chance you might be doing something wrong, or you might be inventing something. If you're inventing something, that's great, you will have to build it. But there is also a very good chance that you might be doing something wrong and you're not able to fit your use case into what exists in the industry today. So before I talk about how Thomson Reuters approached, what was the problem that Thomson Reuters had and how we approached it, I'll take a minute to talk about the product name Checkpoint. So basically, we approached a problem with BrowserStack for a product named Checkpoint. So Checkpoint is a research and guidance solution that basically gives accurate and trusted answers for tax and accounting professional across the globe. It is the market leader in that product segment. So it has been around for a while. As a product, it has been around for a while and very successful. So we, Thomson Reuters, decided that we need a new product and a newer version of Checkpoint. So we released an upgraded version of Checkpoint called as Checkpoint Edge. Checkpoint Edge is a AI and ML based reincarnation of Checkpoint, if I can call it. And for Checkpoint Edge, we were looking at cloud native, loosely coupled microservice based architecture. And one thing, as part of DevOps and automation, one thing that we were really excited about is that with this loosely coupled architecture, we would be actually able to reap some of these benefits and have faster time to market, because that was one real challenge that we wanted to solve with Checkpoint Edge, that we wanted to make sure that we have new features that were developed, gets delivered to our customers as fast as possible. Now, we started our development and we were still not seeing those benefits, right? We did an introspection and we started looking at, hey, what's causing us this delay? What is the bottleneck? Now, when we started looking at the different aspects of our workflow, we understood that we forgot something, which is a common mistake that the industry makes today. We forgot that our QA framework and the QA platform that we had, that was built for the older monolithic Checkpoint product, and it was not really scaling with the cloud native platform that we built. So we had to finally revamp our QA framework. We had to revamp our QA platform, and we started looking for a buy solution where we could have a QA platform which will scale with our cloud native solution, with the microservice-based architecture, which can provide us the option to test Checkpoint against multiple browser and OS combinations parallelly and bring down our QA timelines so that we can go to market faster, right? We wanted to make sure that we are able to deliver our features to customers as soon as possible. So to sum up, in general, if you have a common problem, then obviously you just need to buy the solution. As far as Checkpoint and Thomson Reuters was concerned, our problem statement was that we wanted to go to market faster. And we'll see in the next couple of slides how that played into a few other factors as well. Cool. The next and probably the biggest factor that plays into the build versus buy decision is budget. So you have a problem, you found a solution for that, you found a buy solution for that, right? You found a solution which exists in the market. And what you wanted to do, you went and to your leadership or your finance team, you said, you wanted to buy that solution. And most often, the question that you will always get is, how much does it cost and how much does it cost us to build a solution, homegrown solution, right? We're really bad at estimation. In general, if you look at our industry, we're really bad at estimation. And we might look at, when you have, if it's a pretty big platform that you're looking at, you might give a multi-year budget, right? We will talk a little bit later about few factors that you need to consider when you're estimating. So we'll factor that in later. But let's assume that you're giving a budget for a multi-year project, and the chances of that getting approved compared to a monthly charge or even a yearly charge for a buy solution, that is easier. So from a software point of view, you might be able to get away with a monthly recurring payment or a yearly recurring payment rather than a multi-year project, the $5 million 5-year plan, which hardly gets approved now. As far as Checkpoint is concerned, our decisions for the new QA platform, it was not really based on budget, to be honest. It was based on the fact that we wanted to ensure that we will be able to deliver new features to customers fast. Fortunately, again, we had done a lot of market research, and BrowserStack had the right solution, which basically, with respect to cost and timelines, which fit our budget and roadmap. So with respect to budget, yes, cost plays an important factor, but it's just one factor. It should be just one factor among the others to decide. It's not the only factor. Timelines. I think this one is also a big factor that can decide whether you need to buy a solution or build pretty easily, right? If you need a solution right now, then there is no option. You're basically stuck with buying it. And it's a good thing. I think if you look at buying a solution versus building and the timelines and how fast you're going to get your return on investment, buying a solution is going to give you, most of the time, buying a solution is going to give you a faster return on investment. You will sometimes, it could be an easy decision with a now, right? You need a solution now. But then you will also have problems which are a nagging issue that you want to fix eventually, right? It's not a problem that is core to the existence of your business. So if you have a problem which is core to the existence of the business, again, that's a simple option. You will have to buy it at that point. But if there is a nagging issue which you could do it later, I would still suggest buy, but then you could opt for a building solution. And again, and towards the end of the slide, we are also discussing some of the factors to consider for build. As far as Checkpoint is concerned, again, our target was faster time to market, right? We needed to make sure that we bring down the time to market for Checkpoint Edge and make sure that, and eventually for Checkpoint as well, to be honest, and make sure that we are able to deliver those features much faster to our customers. So as far as timelines for that project was concerned, we needed the solution now, and just buy was the only option there. The next option to consider is opportunity cost. I believe while taking the build versus buy decision, something that is not discussed as much as it should be is opportunity cost. I think if you decide ever to build something in-house, you need to ask 3 questions. One, what could those additional resources be spent on? 2, when you allocate those resources to building, are you taking those employees away from their most meaningful work? 3, whether you're aligned with your business and the business roadmap, right? I think these 3 questions, if you have a no for any of these questions, to be honest, it should be a buy. You do not really have to look at that decision any further. You will basically have to buy the solution. And most of the time it is. These 3 factors will go, if you consider these 3 factors, you will decide to buy. Now, why do I say that this is not really considered a lot? To be honest, again, as I said, cost is the overwhelming factor that decides a buy versus build decision. But under the hood, I think if you start considering the opportunity cost, which adds up, right? If you look at the resources that you have, and if you have the priorities right, as far as your roadmap is concerned, as far as technology roadmap is concerned, you will take the decision to buy a solution and then build stuff that matter for your business. Let's also take an example here. Imagine that you're a company which is on the cutting edge of AI and ML, and you have some great engineers that joined your company. They have great experience in machine learning and artificial intelligence, and they just joined because they wanted to solve that hard problems for you. And you basically call them up and say that, hey, we're going to be putting you on building an A/B testing platform or a QA testing, building a QA testing platform, right? It will be really demotivating for them. I think it is going to be demotivating for them. And more importantly, that's going to delay any major technology breakthroughs that you might have as an organization, as a technology group. As far as Checkpoint is concerned, it's a great story for us that we, instead of managing the QA infrastructure, the resources that was supposed to, or the time that we were supposed to spend on QA, we were able to use that time to scale up the resources to build cloud skills, which is again in alignment with Thomson Reuters and some of the path forward that we have. So it was rewarding for all the engineers who worked on that. Instead of spending time managing QA infrastructure, they were able to learn something new and move on to the cloud technologies. The next factor that supports buy is quality compromise. The focus and efforts of your business are likely not dedicated to solving an exact problem that you have. For example, if it is, again, we go back to an A/B testing platform or a feature flag platform, right? If you are a fintech, or if you are any industry where you're focused on solving your customers' problems, and that should be your primary goal. You're not really focused on solving, or your effort is not there to solve the problem that you have with respect to an A/B testing or anything like that. So think about a homegrown platform and how much time and effort will you put in to ensure that the platform has enough quality, it can scale, it is built for high availability? Not really, right? You don't even have unit tests for some of the platforms that we build. So the quality of what we build really is not that great compared to the products that we build, especially if you're building homegrown platforms. So it is easy to build small scale solutions, but it is easy to build that POC, but then making that POC production ready takes a lot of time, a lot of resources, and most of the time we underestimate, and we end up needing more time, more resources, and more money, which might not be always available. So we end up with a solution which is half cooked and probably not usable at all or partially usable, which is in the industry. So to wrap up this slide, I think quality compromise is a very important factor that needs to be considered. Think about the focus and the effort that you will put in to build. Forget about the money. Think about the quality of the product that you will get. Now, the last factor to consider as far as buying is concerned is technical debt and long-term vision. Again, something that is not really concerned, right? Not really considered enough. So let's take an example. Again, imagine you're a fintech and you decide to build a feature flag platform. I love feature flag platforms. You're not focused on building the best feature flag platform ever, right? You're basically focused on solving that one problem that you have for one product, at best for the complete organization, at best. I don't think that happens commonly as well. But what happens is, to make that solution work, what do? You basically end up making workarounds. You end up making quick fixes, especially if you have tight deadlines and tight budget. You end up making it work. Now, making it work means, in loosely coupled, it means technical debt, right? What happens is that technical debt keeps on adding up, and the platform basically needs to be managed. It needs to be upgraded. It needs to be updated every so that the technology stack is up to date. You will have new requirements. I think all that adds up, and before you know it, you have a big mess to handle. The other fact is that, again, it is very subjective, but most of us, as we are technologists, and one thing that's common is we love building stuff, but we don't like to maintain it. We build stuff, we move on, build something new, newer technology, newer stack, cooler technology, and then we move on again. I don't think we like maintaining anything that we build. And basically what happens over time is somebody is maintaining that platform, hopefully, that you build in the first year when you join the company. But the products that are associated with that feature flag platform that you build, they are stuck with that, right? The capabilities of that product is actually degrading because of that feature flag platform, because it takes a lot of effort to make it work. And as the time passes, the focus and roadmap of firms change. I think this is the long-term vision is a pretty big factor that you need to consider. I think if you look at where we are right now, if you look at where our industry is right now, and if you look at where the whole world is right now, I don't think anybody planned for this, right? When things like that happens, when firms change their priorities, when firms start looking at their priorities and make sure that it is aligned with business priorities, one thing that happens is they start looking at the money spent, the effort spent, the resources, where they are being, the engineers, where they are being allocated. The first thing that gets cut when something like that happens are the homegrown solutions. And most of the time, because these homegrown solutions directly does not help the business, right? It might indirectly even help it, but there is no direct correlation with your business roadmap and business goals and your homegrown solutions. So what end up happening again is either half-good solutions or solutions which nobody maintains, and it becomes a big mess that somebody has to handle. Cool. So these were all the factors that we talked about as far as buying a solution is concerned. Now let's move into the next slide. Let's talk about factors that will force you to build. And you heard me right. I think we should be forced to build, and not build should not be our first priority. So there are factors which will force you to build solution, which is fine. Building solutions is absolutely fine, but it should be something that because of various reasons, you should be forced to do that, and it should not be your first attempt. And again, we can talk more about each of these factors. They are data, security, comprehensive solution, market risk, and talent. So we'll start with data. And cool. So the data, if there is one single factor that will push the current industry into building solutions, that is going to be data. That's the biggest consideration that we will have for building solution. In today's ecosystem of privacy concerns and regulations, it's more important than ever to ask, how is the third party or the vendor that you're going to be buying a product from, how are they going to use that proprietary data? Where is it going to be hosted? Who can access it? There is a lot of privacy and regulations, regulatory concerns that almost the whole of industry has today. If your data, the other factor to consider is if your data is vital to the competitive advantage that you have. And if you really don't trust the third party, again, there should be a way to trust the third party. There should be a framework to do that. We'll discuss that later. But if you don't trust, then probably you're going to be forced to build a solution. One thing that will help, I'm pretty sure almost all across the industry, it is a standard now, but having data classification, have the proper data classification, make sure that based on what classification of data is getting exposed, you can ensure that the vendor, third-party vendor that you have is getting assessed based on that exposure. The next factor to consider is security risk. So the external control of data that we talked about in the previous slide, that leads us to the next factor, which might force you to build, which is security risk. Cyber attacks, internal and external, are common occurrence these days, right? How many of you got your Bitcoins doubled last week? You might be following the best security practices, but will the third party follow the same? Especially if you have to share critical data that's core to the existence of your business. You might be forced to build a solution. And again, only if it is core to business. I mean, there are different data classifications. You will have to really look at the data classification and what kind of data is getting exposed to your third party. And based on that, you can decide. So one solution is to have build a framework. And Again, I'll talk towards the end of the slide what Thomson Reuters does with that. But build a framework which basically helps you to do proper vendor assessment, make sure that your risk exposure based on your data is clearly assessed, and ensure that you have a clear separation of data and things like that. So the next factor to consider is comprehensive solution. I think we touched upon a little bit with respect to when we talked about your problem, right? If you have a problem, again, we talked about the unique problem and how you need to look at that. But if you have a problem which is solved by a solution, but it's an edge case scenario, which is again something which you need to consider, right? If the problem, when you're buying a solution, that solution should fit right in. If it is not fitting right in, then you might spend the same amount of time that you will take to build a similar solution, integrating that. And that could be because of architectural concerns, that could be because of the way your application or the product or the enterprise is set up. But if the solution does not fit in right away, if the solution is, your problem is an edge case scenario in that solution that you're going to buy, then maybe that's going to force you to build rather than buying, because it is not going to fit right in. The other thing which sometimes we don't consider, again, from an enterprise perspective, something to consider is, can the application that you're buying scale, right? You need to, does it have SSO solutions? Does it have consolidated billing for various departments? The problem that you solved in your product or in your specific domain, can that be expanded for other products across an enterprise? Can this be a solution that can be used? Again, a framework helps. We'll talk about that later. Now, the next factor is market risk. Again, a very important factor, which is not really considered a lot when buying solutions. So when you're buying a third-party vendor solution, knowingly or unknowingly, you're going to be exposed to the risk that the third party has. What I mean by that, so when you buy a solution, you should have the confidence in that vendor or third party and in their ability to weather a market down, right? You need to make sure that their business health and their roadmap is strong enough so that you can have a healthy long-term relationship. Especially look at the market today, right? We are basically going through unprecedented times, where a lot of the industry, a lot of products, a lot of companies are not able to survive. We have seen a lot of examples like this earlier as well. For example, I know of a firm, again, I'll not name it, but I know of a firm which was providing key value store for on-premise customers. It was pretty good. If you're familiar with S3, for example, an on-premise version of S3, let's look at that. And a lot of the customers, especially fintech customers, were using it really well. And what happened eventually, that product was really good, but the company could not scale, it could not sustain. They filed for bankruptcy. And any company that was using that, they had to run around and find another solution as early as possible, as quickly as possible. So you need to agree that when you're going into a third-party vendor agreement with a third-party vendor, you will always be exposed to the market risk of that vendor. One solution for this is to build. Another solution would be to have an exit strategy, right? Especially when you're going into a long-term contract with a vendor, you need to make sure that if this vendor is coming back with a high price hike later, or you're not able to sustain the relationship, what should you do? There should be an exit strategy that should be part of your thought process as far as buy versus build. The last factor as far as build is concerned, which is probably the best factor you need to consider. Again, personally, I think this is a factor that might be pushing a lot of people to build, is talent. And we talked about a little bit when we discussed about the quality compromises, right? Imagine that you're the same company which is at the cutting edge of AI and ML, and you have engineers who joined your company just to solve that hard problems. And as an organization, you go ahead and decide that I'm going to buy AI and ML solution off the market. It's going to be really demotivating for them. The other thing you need to consider is it an area where you really want to develop skills as well? So look at your business priorities. Look at the roadmap of your company and where it is heading and what is the priorities as far as technical roadmap is concerned. If you need resources and engineers who are capable in that area, then it is definitely worth building just to make sure that you have skilled resources. Again, all of these things should fall in line. The other thing to consider is also whether you have the right skill to start with. So if you don't have the right skill to start with, maybe you have to buy a solution and have a build long-term solution, things like that. But talent is a very big factor you need to consider, which is something that a lot of the organization look at when they look at build solution. Now, what should we really do? Whether we should buy or whether you should be building. As I said earlier, I think that you should build only if it is absolutely necessary. I'm not saying that building is bad, right? So at Thomson Reuters, we have a mix of both build and buy solutions. We have some excellent homegrown solutions, which are developed by some very talented engineers, and it has been working out really well. But over the last few years, we have been focusing a lot on third-party solutions as well. That is just because we are basically focusing on homegrown solutions based on our overall organizational goals, and third-party solutions for something which is not a priority for us. But if there is a tried and tested solution, it would be really interesting to bring that as part of our overall organizational architecture. One other thing that you need to consider is to, as far as build is concerned, I talked about it, build absolutely when it is necessary. You should focus on the problem of your organization. You should focus on the problems that you need to solve for your customers, and not really focus on other peripheral issues and try to how you can try to solve that. One good framework that we can have is so if you have a good framework as far as a third-party evaluation is concerned, as far as third-party software is concerned, that helps. So how it works in Thomson Reuters, right? So at Thomson Reuters, we have a very good framework that was built, which basically brings together all the thought leaders across Thomson Reuters. And we have a forum that they have, it's known as a governance group. They come together, and that forum or the governance group allows us to create a framework where you can go through different phases of third-party evaluation, go through all these factors that we talked about and more, to be honest. Look at how those solutions can scale at an enterprise level. Look at how those solutions can be used somewhere else in the industry or in the enterprise. And along with, so we can have third-party vendor assessment. We are looking at the data that we are going to expose, all those factors that we talked about, right? That framework basically allows us to go through that decision tree. And based on that decision tree and that framework that we have, we are able to take a proper build and buy decision. So what happens at the end of the build or buy decision? We have a set of cataloged products or solutions which we have basically approved by this council or governance group. Anyone who is developing another product, anyone who is basically having similar problem, they can actually leverage solutions from that approved list. Before you consider buying or building solution, both, to be honest, especially in buying solution, one thing that you need to consider is your architecture as well, right? If you're buying the right tools definitely matters, right? Buying the right tools definitely solves a lot of your problem, but it does not solve all the problems. I think we have a good example with Checkpoint. So we talked about how we were looking at buying BrowserStack for our QA platform requirements. And we did buy. And one thing that we quickly realized that the current framework that we had with Checkpoint, and it was not able to scale with BrowserStack. So we had a problem where our current architecture was not scaling with the product that we bought. We had to quickly evolve, and we actually switched to robot framework, which is pretty cool. We switched to robot framework, and we were able to use BrowserStack and the tool to the fullest extent, right? So as part of your evaluation, one thing additionally that you will have to do is how your architecture and your frameworks that you're using fits in with the third-party solution. Just buying the tool and assuming that your problem is getting solved is not realistic. So the last thing that I want to talk about in this slide is we are in an industry which is rapidly evolving and reinventing itself, right? We are at a phase where we can buy the required solutions and just plug them in and just develop the core of the business and be really successful. And there is a lot of products in the industry that is doing that. So definitely, when you're looking at a buy or a build solution, look at all these factors and then take a call and focus on your business needs. Now, this is something which has been out there for a while. I think I included this slide because I really love it. It has been there for 4 or 5 years now. It's known as the periodic table of DevOps tool. I'm pretty sure a lot of you might have already seen this. But why I wanted to bring this up is because if you look at this list, what this gives us, for those who don't know, is it is a list of tools that can be used for various activities that we have, right? So these are all the options, either open source or buy solutions that we have. We can pick and choose for each and every activity. For example, analytics, Artifactory, cloud, collaboration, and containerization, build, deployment, database management, everything. So you can pick and choose the tools that matters and just develop the core of your business and have these tools wrap around that and have a very successful business, right? And this is the model that we are actually evolving into. So where is the build opportunity here? It's very less. Build opportunity should be focused on that business logic and the business solution that you really want to build. Cool. I would wrap up with this last slide. I would leave you with this quote from Henry Ford, which is very interesting, that if you need a machine and you don't buy it, and then you will ultimately find that you have paid for it and you don't have it. So let's try to buy as many solutions as possible and build as less as possible. Praveen, we can get into the questions.
Great. Thanks a lot, Abesh. Some very interesting sort of thoughts on build versus buy. I think I love the logical way in which you've broken down some of the key factors to consider. Great. So let's dive into the questions. We've got quite a few now. I think one question was around compliance and security, and how do you take those factors into consideration? Specifically, was there a huge impact when you were evaluating this at Thomson Reuters?
Yes, so compliance, and as I said, we have a framework where we have to go through, so BrowserStack, you will be aware of this more than me, because as any vendor that we are actually signing an agreement with, they will have to go through a thorough vendor assessment. So there is definitely, we have our internal teams which will get in touch with us. For example, in my case, when we looked at BrowserStack, we had to go through a thorough assessment of what kind of data is getting exposed, whether the customer data is getting exposed at all, and if customer data is getting exposed, how is it being used, and all those things. So there is definitely a framework that we will have to go through, and at the end of that, it basically goes through. It basically results in a vendor assessment. So vendor assessment at Thomson Reuters is pretty well structured. So you will have to go through, and it takes a little bit time, but you will have to go. The vendor will have to go through multiple assessment by the internal security and risk analysis teams. Make sure that the risk and analysis involved is in accordance with our privacy and data requirements that we have. So that framework helps us in the vendor assessment.
Great, thanks. So second question is around, you talked about, I think one of the key factors in build versus buy is the cost, right? At least the direct cost, not yes. all the other hidden costs. But what kind of framework did you use at Thomson to estimate the cost of building a solution versus?
So yeah, that's an interesting question, right? So cost is, there are two factors that you'll have to consider, because either you will have to look at the cost that is involved in buying solution A, B, C, or you'll have to look at the cost involved in building it, homegrown solution that you need to build, right? Mm-hmm. The one thing that was advantage with respect to our solution was that we already had a homegrown solution, which was costing us X amount of dollars. Let's not get in details, but X amount of dollars, right? The fact was that it was not really scaling with respect to where we wanted it to scale. That was the biggest factor. So, and cost was a factor that was considered. It was obviously the homegrown solution was the direct cost was cheaper. There was a lot of hidden costs that we didn't even factor in at that point. But for us to make this decision, it was the fact that it was not scaling as per our requirement. But there are scenarios where cost definitely plays a factor, right? You might just at the purview, you will see that the cost to build might be cheaper, but then this framework that I talked about, again, that allows us to estimate it correctly, because if you add infrastructure cost, if you add licensing cost, if you add all these things, that adds up, you will be able to actually come up with a cost and compare apples to apples to make sure that you make the right decision.
Great. I think another question is around looking at potentially like a hybrid solution, maybe a combination of build and buy, or maybe starting with a solution off the shelf and then moving to something that you're building in-house. What do you think about?
Yeah. So again, that helps. To be honest, that is a possible solution, right? Let's be honest also. When was the last time something that we bought which works really well? When was the last time we changed that? Again, that is not something which a lot of the companies does practically. Yes, that is a solution which we can look at, basically buy now as a long-term solution, parallelly build it. But if you look at the finance of it, right, getting funding for buying something and then getting funding for building it parallelly, that does not really work out really well. So yes, it is an option that can be looked at, but from a financial point of view, from an approval point of view, and realistically, that might not be that effective. The hybrid solution is something that, yes, that can be looked at. So hybrid solution, not just basically looking at in-house solution and a vendor solution, but also looking at multiple vendor solution, right? That's also a solution that you can look at, especially if you want to club it up with things like cloud, right? If you want to use the scalability of cloud and then still want to use some of the vendors and bring them in and mix all of that, you can definitely do that. There are a lot of products that vendor products that are available. For example, in the performance test area, there are a lot of products that are available which scales with cloud and works together really well. So that's a very good solution that can be looked at.
Great. I think, Abesh, just to wrap up, there are a couple of questions I think it would be great to hear your thoughts on, since you sort of have built this deep expertise in QA and testing. A couple of people have asked about, one is, how do I think about changing from manual testing to automated testing if I'm thinking about it from a career perspective?
Yep.
And, somebody who's just starting out in the QA sort of world,
Yep.
How can they sort of build up their technical or remove their technical debt, so to speak, personal technical debt, and any resources or places that you can suggest?
Yeah,
places to go?
I think the first thing to look at is, and this is a little bit controversial. I've got into trouble in saying this before, especially with some of my QA friends. Don't look at yourself as a QA engineer. Like, start as a developer, because the future is that it's basically developers are doing the QA, right? For example, if you look at robot framework, and I think there's a pretty cool talk on robot framework. If you look at robot framework and how we use robot framework, I don't have QA engineers working on robot framework. What I have is QA developers who work on robot framework, who basically builds the underlying framework, which allows anybody for that matter. It can be a fresh intern who can write the test cases, right? So start with that. So maybe start with something like Python, for example. Robot framework is great with Python, or any other programming language. Be a developer first, and then you can decide whether you want to develop code to basically build a product, or develop code to test a product. So that's my take on it.
Great. Yeah. Yep, we've got a nice talk by Pekka on day 3
yes.
on robot framework. So that should be interesting.
Looking forward to that.
Yes. Great. I think that is about it. Let me just go through the questions one more time. Great. I think one last question, Abesh, is, you talked about evaluating sort of different QA platforms. Could you maybe help the attendees, understand, at a high level, how did you evaluate different platforms? What were sort of some of your objectives? Not about build versus buy, but just technical evaluation. And what are some of the things that you considered?
Correct. So I think there are a few factors that we had. So one thing that we were looking at, again, if you look at the solution that we wanted to look at, was we wanted to have faster time to market, which means that we were looking at solution that will basically scale even from a long-term perspective, right? For example, what if we are launching a mobile product for PWA for Checkpoint Edge? Will the platform support mobile testing, and how can different devices be tested on that platform? So even when we're looking at our immediate needs, we were looking at long term, and we came up with a list of functionalities or requirements, I would say, that needs to be satisfied. So once we have that, we effectively reached out to, just like you, we reached out to other vendors, and we worked with them directly to do a 1-month POC to make sure that we had all our requirements were covered. We ran some of our test cases, made sure that our framework was compatible, and if we had to change the framework, how will that impact? And again, we also looked at exit strategy, right? How solid is the performance of the company, and how, if you want to change a vendor someday, how easy it would be, things like that. We also looked at, again, along with the other vendors, we also looked at some homegrown solutions, which are really good, but then, as I said, homegrown solutions, they were really curated to specific needs, and it was not really easy for us to just adopt that. It would have taken more time to adopt that. So yes, so basically, to answer your question, we came up with a set of requirements, which we worked with the vendor directly, and did a POC, made sure that all the requirements were covered, and then looked at what fit our enterprise requirements best, right? If you look at BrowserStack and how we wanted to scale it with the other products in Thomson Reuters, some of the other products are already using it. So how that fit in with Thomson Reuters. So that was the last thing that we considered.
Awesome. Great. I think maybe last, Abesh, you could maybe tell us a little bit about, what next with you and your role at Thomson Reuters, and what are some of the exciting projects maybe that you're going to be working on for the next few months and years.
Yeah, so basically I was working on this Checkpoint Edge product, and I'm moving into a different role within one of the products, which is the primary focus for Thomson Reuters. So within that role, again, it's a platform that we're building. I will not be able to reveal a lot about that right now due to due to certain factors, but basically I'll be moving into that role and working with the team as part of that platform.
Awesome, great. Thanks a lot, Abesh. Thank you for a very, very nicely structured presentation and talk on the build versus buy consideration. I think you clarified many doubts in my mind and all the attendees' minds too on how to make this decision. I think all of us can use this framework for every decision, purchase decision that we make. So thanks a lot again. Appreciate you taking the time to speak to us, and all the best, and stay safe.